Okay, well, I first met Tom back in 1988 at Tri-State Skydivers. It was before I knew the Lord, and Tom and I had a lot in common. We'd make a lot of skydives together, go to the bar after skydiving all day, and just spend a lot of time together on the weekends. You know, once I gave my life to the Lord and realized how He had saved me from the gutter and where I was heading, not only with my life, but for eternity, I started praying for my close friends and folks like Tom and others, and trying to share the gospel with them any opportunity I had. Tom was pretty straightforward. He didn't hold back. The first time I invited him to church, he didn't have effing time for that. He would always mention that he wanted what I had, that he saw a difference in me and my life, and that I had a certain joy. And eventually he got to the point where he kept saying, well, someday I'll go. And that someday happened. After church we were having coffee, and I ran into Tom. And I asked him, I said, so how did you like the service? He said, you know, I liked the pastor's message. The church is beautiful, the music was wonderful, but the people here are just too effing nice. And that was Tom Vance before he gave his life to the Lord. I think it touched Tom tremendously, how much people cared for him right from day one. You know, that we were so effing nice in his mind. He realized we were sincere, and he knew people were praying for him. And in time, there was a Christian retreat weekend coming up, and we invited him to that. And his first response was, I'd rather be set on fire than spend a weekend at a Christian retreat weekend. And again, perseverance, and he went to that weekend.
I met Tom Vance at the men's Christian retreat weekend. The following week, we had a gathering, and I remember seeing him standing with his back positioned against the wall, and he was just observing and watching everybody, and nobody was there talking with him. And I went over and started up a conversation with Tom, and it was at that point he just came forth with all of this information that I didn't even ask for, about himself, about his story. What that was like for me was overwhelming. I didn't expect that, and this information about post-traumatic stress disorder, and he began to explain to me what that was like. I wanted to invite him along with other men so that we could study the Bible together. And Tom actually had accepted. I remember one specific night, the Holy Spirit was just taking Tom and peeling back layer after layer and going right to the core of who he was. It was unbelievable. He's being completely unraveled, and this was a tough man. This was a soldier. And I remember him standing out on my front sidewalk, pointing his finger at me and going and saying, you remember all those things that I thought I was, and you're telling me I'm not? I'm a special ops, I'm Green Beret, I'm an explosives expert. I've had over 4,000 jumps out of an airplane. You mean to tell me that that's not who I am? And I'm like, God's telling you that. And God's telling you that's not how He sees you or how He views you. And that was the moment, I think, where Tom began to realize that that box full of emotions that was locked up on the shelf was rotting. Honestly, I think probably for the first time in his life, was willing to surrender. I remember a conversation that I had with Tom after he had made a confession of faith in the Lord. And he came to me and he goes and says, I want to start a men's Bible study like what you did with me, but the point of emphasis I want it to be on other men who have served in the military who suffer from PTSD. Tom was passionate to give what had been given to him to everyone else.
So the first time that I met Tom was at a small group, and it was a little bit intimidating at first. to meet Tom. And I remember leaving and going up to hug him that night, and he said, "I don't hug." And I remember Jody said, "This is the wrong crowd for that, Tom." And so we hugged and hugged every time we saw each other after that. So Tom was about action. He was a mover and a doer, and he loved to help individuals, and he would encourage everyone to reach out and to love their neighbor, because Tom Vance loved his neighbor.
We were kind of an unlikely bunch, like Doc in his 80s, 70s, 60s, and 50s. And unlikely, but very likely in God's plan. We just grew to love each other, the four of us. There were times that we would be going out for dinner after church on Saturday night, but we'd get to the restaurant and there'd be like 12 of us, because Tom was an inviter and he wanted people around, and we would pray together and share dinner and just have great conversation. We had a time that we were doing a kind of serving some needs of people that lived on my way to work. We started talking about church, and that I went to Hope Church. They did agree to come to church with me, and I couldn't always take them. So Tom would offer to pick them up and bring them to church, and maybe Doc would take them home, or Doc would give one of them a ride home in his convertible. So it was just a kind of group that loved to serve others, and that was often led by Tom.
About 4 years ago, Karen invited me to a prayer group where I was introduced to Tom Vance. That was the beginning of a long-term relationship. Tom's passion as part of the church was to develop a PTS group for veterans. And he asked me if I would cooperate since we had different backgrounds. Tom had the ability to interpret the Bible, to interpret the religious passages, to interpret the CDs in such a way that I could understand, and they had a great deal of meaning toward my becoming a better Christian. Tom and I had a lot alike in that I think we both were kind of quiet Christians. We rather pray to ourselves, think to ourselves, than be so outgoing. And his influence was a highlight of my life to this point. And because of that, I'm proud to say that Tom was a great friend, he was a great family man, but most importantly to me, he was a very good Christian.
When he was sick, I asked Tom what he thinks about when he lays his head on his pillow at night. And his response is, "Karen, all I think about is when I meet Jesus." So, gosh, what a treasure to be able to have that intimate relationship with our Savior.